having me. And thank you for the opportunity to share my story. Mine is just one of thousands of experiences from people who took a leap of faith that is required when you marry a service member. In the past, to marry someone in the military meant letting go of where you live, letting go of what you will do, and letting go of who you will do it with. But things are changing. The spouse of today deserves to be supported if they choose to work. At the moment, there isn't nearly enough support in place to assist them. We have retention issues, and we have a high divorce rate. The foundation of the military are its families, and its families are suffering because some of us feel unsupported. We are often far from the nucleus of our families. Sometimes we struggle to make ends meet, and we are often overwhelmed by the emotional burden of raising children without much help. But today, I am here to talk about only one facet of the military family: spouses and work. In my 18 years as an active duty Marine Corps spouse and 10 years as a full-time realtor, I know that supporting a spouse who chooses to work can only bolster the economy, improve their family's finances, and contribute to the military as a whole. Marrying a service member is not for the faint of heart. It requires an inherent inner strength and independence. My goal this morning and in the years ahead is to enhance the experience for the military spouse who dares to have a career. Let me tell you my story. I met my husband Paul at a small college in southwestern Virginia in 1997. I had left the security and support of my small town and big extended family in western Massachusetts. My upbringing was very good. I was loved and encouraged and surrounded by people who grew up similarly and then raised families of their own there. A few pivotal experiences in my adolescence opened my eyes to the world outside, and I decided to venture outside of my comfort zone. While studying at Roanoke College, Paul and I quickly fell into an intense and devoted relationship that endures today. Paul hails from Houston. His family's military service is impressive. His paternal great-grandfather, Bernouf Thibault, served in both the Navy and the Coast Guard for more than 30 years. Both of Paul's paternal grandparents served during World War II. His grandfather, Reinhold, was a Marine F-4 pilot, and Jeannie, his grandmother, a Navy Wave. Paul's father, Dave, served in the Air Force as a C-5 and a C-130 pilot from 1968 to 1978. Quite honestly, military service is in Paul's DNA. So naturally, when he came of age, the pull of the military was strong. We had many discussions about his dream to fly in the military over the course of our pre-marriage relationship. Of course, I wanted to support him, but my concerns were clear. I knew I wanted to pursue a career one day, and I was concerned about living so far away from my family. We came to a point in our relationship where I had to decide what I wanted to do. Paul was entering Marine OCS at Quantico with a flight contract. I was living in Boston working in retail management. It was the summer of 2001. By that fateful September day, Paul had completed OCS and was attending the basic school, a post-commission indoctrination for Marine officers also at Quantico. I will spare you the details of the hysteria that I witnessed in Boston that day and the ripple effect for years to come of minor degrees of separation between myself and many others killed that day. But I will tell you that laying in my bed in my studio apartment that night on September 11th, the noise of those low-flying scrambled F-16s brought me much-needed comfort. Before that day, I knew I wanted to marry Paul, but I didn't want to share him with the Marine Corps. After that day, I knew I didn't have a choice. So my perspective on the world at large had changed, like so many others. I would come to realize that aside from Paul's personal commitment to service, we now shared a patriotic commitment. Over the course of the next few years, we moved frequently in the pursuit of his career as an F-18 pilot, all the while growing our family, befriending couples just like us, and carving out a life all our own. With each move, I continued to work part-time for Talbot's, a women's clothing store that valued my loyalty and did well to accommodate my new and unpredictable life. I observed all kinds of military spouses during these, my formative mil spouse years. I admired all of them for devotion to their service members, But I also noticed that most of them did not work. These were college-educated women who stayed home because it was nearly impossible to work as a military spouse. I heard the same reasons for not working over and over. We move too much. It's too hard to work without help of family. And I don't want to work just to pay for daycare. All valid reasons. But I also observed that not working was hindering these women in ways that I did not want to relate. I did not want to struggle to pay bills. I did not want to burden my exhausted husband with the pitfalls of my ennui. I did not want to burden my children with any resentment I felt for bearing the load of parenthood. I did not want to deny my desire to work. For me, work was a lifeline. And as much as I appreciated the chance to work part-time, I wanted something more flexible, more rewarding, and with more income potential. I knew I deserved to have both a happy family and a successful career if I wanted it. With an impending year-long move in our future, I decided now was the perfect time to begin pursuing my career as a realtor. I would spend our year at Expeditionary Warfare School in Quantico, studying for and passing the Virginia State exam. I'd hatched the perfect plan for myself, and I couldn't wait to get started. Paul, my #1 supporter, was none too happy about my endeavor. We had fallen into a comfortable existence that I was threatening to upend. We were not financially stable, and I was asking us to take a financial risk. Paul reluctantly agreed, and I began taking classes in the fall of 2008. I loved learning about real estate. It was as if this information was tailor-made for my consumption. I wanted to know all the ins and outs of purchasing and selling. And I could picture myself handling the demands of military life, motherhood, and a career. What I did not prepare myself for was the difficulties I would encounter as Paul's career progressed, and how that would affect the way I worked. At the time of my first real estate licensure, I did not know that there were no formal standards in place for military spouses with careers that required state licensure. Soon after passing the licensing exam, I began to work with both buyers and sellers. My niche was military finance. Soon enough, I knew everything about the VA loan and started converting renters into buyers. My broker, Tracy, started to call me the flipper. I was relentless in my pursuit of success, perhaps not only because I wanted it for my family, but because I wanted to prove that it was possible. At times, it was difficult to handle the demands of work and family, but Paul was working as a flight instructor, and his shore tour was enabling me to find my footing and establish a method for my business without the disruption of a long deployment. My first encounter with transferring my license came in the summer of 2012 when Paul received 3-year orders to Beaufort with VMFA 251, a Thunderbolt. This was going to be his department head tour, where his responsibilities would be greater than before, and he wouldn't be able to support me as much. I was confident with the business strategy that I'd implemented in Virginia Beach, and that it would transfer well to Beaufort, an even smaller and closer-knit military community. And I had lived there previously, so I was familiar with the area, and I felt like I could navigate a real estate career there with ease. I thought, could it really be that hard? I soon discovered that starting over wasn't as easy as I'd hoped it'd be. Beaufort is a charming town whose main industry is the military. The realtors in Beaufort were not rushing to let me into the fold. But in time, and around the military aviation community, word began to spread about me, and the work began to pour in. Soon enough, I was averaging a closing a month, and in my banner year, my income surpassed my husband's. Once my income potential was established, Paul and I discussed the financial viability of my business long term. That is to say, we determined that my business had to pay for itself moving forward. This was and is a very effective goal for me year after year. Now, more than ever, I was empowered to encourage other spouses to work. I would mentor young wives overwhelmed with the demands of their husbands' schedules and frustrated by the expectations they often felt strapped with. No matter how busy I was, I would always agree to take a lunch meeting with a spouse. I knew how these women felt, and I wanted to help them and let them know that it would get better. As much as I wanted to help, however, I was only one person. I began to wonder why the military and the powers that be weren't implementing strategy to assist those spouses like me who wanted to work. And then before I knew it, it was time to move again. The greatest career challenge for me to overcome occurred in the months after leaving Buford for San Diego. I was too busy in South Carolina to focus on getting my license here in California. I figured that I would have time to study for and pass the exam after we moved and before our kids started school. But as it often does, life throws us curveballs. Soon after checking into 1st Marines, an infantry regiment at Camp Pendleton, Paul learned that he would be going on a deployment the following summer. It would be to Iraq, and it would be for 9 months. This was the longest deployment we would have to endure to date. I continued to focus on settling my family into a new community, as well as pursuing my license, with an element I hadn't planned on: depression. The reality of leaving Buford began to crash down on me. My friends were there. My children's lives were there. My career was there. Starting over again in California with the added stress of an impending deployment and facing the task of licensure was like pressing a slow motion button on my life. It all felt too difficult and too overwhelming. I learned that California, arguably the most bureaucratic state of them all, did not only not offer reciprocity, but that I would have to go back to real estate school and study 3 different real estate subjects, all of which I would need to pass exams for before I could even take my licensing exam. I told you this life wasn't for the faint of heart. Toward the end of my pre-licensing studies, there was a small gift from the gods of bureaucracy. I discovered that California allows military spouses to have their license expedited after they pass the licensing test from 6 weeks to 2 weeks. It was the boost I needed to get me through. By the time Paul left for deployment, I was licensed, but it had taken me 6 months. It had been a very slow start. It was another 6 months before I made my first commission. My niche was nowhere to be found. It was time to reestablish my business. And that meant that 1 year into 3-year orders, I was just beginning to make a living. I held out hope that things would change, and eventually they did. San Diego real estate slowly became less elusive. By the time, I networked and I carefully invested in local marketing. And once again, I refused to give up. By the time Paul came home from the Middle East, our reunion is captured in the picture right here, I was beginning to feel like my old self again. Things have only gotten better. In fact, things are going so well that we have decided to settle in San Diego after he retires in 2 years. And as Paul's career winds down, I have more time and energy to focus on the things important to me. And I will end on this. I speak to you today on behalf of the women in the pictures behind me, my MilSpouse friends. They're loyal and they're supportive, and all they want is to love their spouses and raise their kids and work. And why shouldn't they? I am grateful for the chance to share my story with you today. Thank you.